YouTubers, welcome back to another episode of Small Engines Questions and Answers for Friday, May 6th, 2011. The first tip I want to give out today is sometimes after replacing the carb kit in your chainsaw, grass trimmer, or other two-cycle powered equipment. Now even after doing all that work, your machine may still not run properly, and I'm just going to show you a quick tip on what could be causing this problem. Here's a chainsaw here that's half apart. I'm going to use it to show you what I mean. What I've seen happen often is that the base gasket between the cylinder and the crankcase will leak. It's either going to be cracked or the bolts may be loose here holding the cylinder down, and that's going to cause an air leak to escape between the cylinder and the crankcase. Now that air leak is going to cause your carburetor not to function properly because it needs that air from the crankcase to power it up. In this case here, there's a small hole here which connects to the air intake. Usually the air going through the carburetor from the crankcase is going to get in through this small hole here in the carburetor, or on a lot of steel saws there's going to be a separate impulse line connected to the carburetor which sends small impulses of air from the crankcase. So in either way, if you have an air leak at the base of the cylinder, there's not going to be enough air going to the carburetor. Here's a typical base gasket here, and sometimes you got to watch for cracks in there. Or, like I mentioned, if the cylinder is simply loose, that's enough for the air to escape between the crankcase and the base of the cylinder. So, if you've exhausted all other things and you're still not sure what's going on, make sure to check the base of your cylinder on the crankcase, because a lot of the time that's leaking air and you're going to keep working on your piece of equipment and it's never going to run properly until that air leak is sealed. One time I was working on a Husqvarna chainsaw. I was leaking air so bad between the cylinder and the crankcase that you could hear the air come out when you were pulling it over. And usually 5 times out of 10, all I have to do is simply tighten up the bolts that hold the cylinder to the crankcase, and that fixes the problem. In my next question, somebody's asking me if they can use Permatex RTV silicone for a head gasket. Well, personally, I don't use RTV silicone for a head gasket, but I do use them for base gaskets, which I just previously showed you on that chainsaw. Now, this RTV silicone here is not meant to be used for a head gasket, but I do believe you can buy a silicone that is meant for the high heat of a head gasket. But I still prefer to use a regular head gasket that is meant for the engine. As you can see in this head gasket from a Tecumseh engine, it's made out of some kind of foil or metal, and it's actually got a bit of thickness to it, and it's meant for the high heat. Some other YouTubers were asking me if they can use regular gasket material to make a head gasket. Well, the answer to that is no, unless it's meant for high heat. So for example, if you used exhaust gasket material, then you could make a head gasket out of it. But if you use regular gasket material like this, which is made of cardboard, it's going to burn up, disintegrate, and then you're going to have a leak there, and it's not going to run good for you. So if you want to use a gasket maker to make a head gasket, make sure you buy the appropriate product. So make sure that the product you're using can withstand the high heat of a head gasket. And remember, if you use it for a base gasket, you don't need a product that can withstand as much heat. It's not as hot at the base of a cylinder than it is where the head gasket is. And sometimes too, people ask me if they can reuse their Tecumseh gaskets like this or Briggs & Stratton for the heads. Well, the answer to that is yes, I do reuse them. If you find though that they're pretty flat or damaged, then get a new one. My next question today is regarding the small flywheels that you will find on outdoor equipment with a molded keyway in it. What I mean exactly by molded keyway is this right here. You can see that the keyway is molded right into the flywheel, as opposed to having a flywheel where you put in a separate keyway. Now this is a flywheel where you put in a separate keyway. It's not molded into the flywheel. Now the question I had earlier this week is a YouTuber said that his broke on his flywheel, and he's wondering, is there a way to repair this? Well, the answer to that is no. He was also wondering, can you stick it back onto the shaft as long as you line up where the keyway used to be? Well, the answer to that again is no, because what can happen is if the flywheel slightly moves on the shaft and then it gets disaligned from the mark on the shaft, is that your ignition timing is going to be off. The reason for having a keyway in the flywheel is to ensure that the timing is kept in check. Now every time the flywheel turns and the magnets go underneath the ignition coil, that's going to cause spark for your engine to run. It's also going to make sure that the spark occurs at the proper time in your engine so that it can run properly without backfiring. So the instant that the flywheel is off timing on the shaft from the keyway here, even if it's a few thousandths of an inch, your engine's not going to run properly. It's going to kick, it's going to backfire, and it's not going to have the high RPMs that it used to have. So at this point here, when the molded keyway breaks on a flywheel like this, I just replace the flywheel. Save yourself the aggravation. You may have to spend a bit of money to do this, but in the end, you'll be happy because your chainsaw or grass trimmer is going to run properly again. I had a guy ask me, what are the kits you use the most often in the summertime? Well, here's just a few kits. There's also many other kits that I use as well, but these are the ones that I use the most often. These are 2 Walbro kits. Now the kit number for this is 631021B. In this kit you've got the bowl gasket, you've got the nut gasket, the needle and seat and the clip, and I often use these on lawnmowers with Tecumseh engines. Also, this kit here is called K10 watt. This one here is D10 watt. The difference is that in the K10 you have all the hardware like the needle and screen and all that. This one here you don't, you just have the diaphragms. Oftentimes you only need this kit, you don't need to replace all the hardware as well. But these are kits you're often going to use in the Walbro carburetors. And also keep yourself a lot of 1/4 inch inside diameter fuel line. You're going to use that on lawnmowers as well and other small engines. So that'll be it for this week's Small Engines Questions and Answers. Thanks for watching, have a safe weekend, and we'll see you next Friday. Take care now.